Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So today we are going to be talking about the effectiveness of law enforcement. We're going to do that because apparently some people don't know what the word effective means. Effective means it is producing the desired result or outcome. It's a pretty simple definition. That's what it means. It doesn't mean status quo. Right now you're hearing a whole bunch of people say, if we reform law enforcement, well, we'll be taking away the tools they need to do their job. They won't be effective anymore. The question is, are they effective now? And I'm not talking about the obvious stuff that we've been talking about all week. I'm talking about, in general, is law enforcement effective? Now, the metric that you should use to determine this is not conviction rate, because that's not fair to law enforcement, to be completely honest. A lot of times law enforcement can do their job, and when it gets turned over to prosecution, the ball gets dropped. So that's not a good metric. The metric you should use is case clearance rate. Now what that means is a case gets opened, law enforcement conducts their investigation, they drop charges on somebody, and they turn it over. That's a cleared case. Now sometimes cases get cleared through what is called exceptional circumstances or exceptional means. This is when, like, the suspect takes themselves out before the cops get to them, or they flee the country, but they know who did it. You know, they have solved the case. That's the metric to use. Now we're going to use the numbers from 2017 because it's a pretty good year. It shows a pretty effective year for law enforcement. We're going to use those numbers. You can find these at the FBI's statistics on this. I'll put a link down there. Okay, so what about the big one? Homicide. What would you imagine the clearance rate is on this? 61.6. It's not really high. It's not incredibly effective. Keep in mind, this is only factoring in cases that were opened. The person that just turns up missing, they're not involved in this. They're not factored into these numbers. Realistically, the real number here on solved is probably about half. It's probably about 50%. Not incredibly effective. Rape, 34.5%. Not incredibly effective, especially given the fact that we know that is the most underreported crime in the country. If you factor in the information and the data we have on that, the true effectiveness of law enforcement in dealing with that crime drops to the single digits. It's not effective. Robbery, 29.7. Okay. Ag assault, 53.3. And keep in mind that normally occurs between people who know each other. Really easy to identify. Yeah, that's not great. That is not effective. I would suggest that that's not effective. Let's go to property crimes that have a victim. Burglary, 13.5. Keep in mind, this is also heavily underreported. When your neighbor had their garage broken into and they didn't call the cops because they didn't want to spend 3 hours filling out paperwork and waiting for them to show up, knowing they weren't going to do anything about it, that doesn't get factored in. This is only where cases were opened. Larceny theft, 19.2. Motor vehicle theft, 13.7. If this was grade school and this was your report card, I would imagine your parents would be pretty upset with you. This is not effective. The system as it stands is not effective. So we cannot use the effectiveness of the current system as a reason not to reform. The reality is some of these reforms would allow law enforcement to spend more time dealing with stuff that actually matters. Crimes with a victim. I would suggest that limiting the scope of law enforcement would allow them to refocus their training on perhaps basic investigative skills rather than learning how to play with their cool new toys. The idea that we should postpone reform because it would hamper the effectiveness of law enforcement is completely blown out of the water when you realize law enforcement is not effective to begin with. It does not produce the desired result or outcome. We need reform. We need it. Now, just to be clear, I have not read the legislation that the Democrats just put up. I haven't seen it yet. So this isn't really in favor of that because it may be completely watered down. It may have snuck stuff in. I haven't looked at it yet. I'll be doing a video on it later. But what this is the information you need to be able to pull out of your hat when you encounter that argument. Well, we can't stop them from doing all of these horrible things because it may make them ineffective. They're not effective now. Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good day.